Hi, everyone. Welcome to another session of the convention. In this instance, I'm going to be interviewing Melinda Snodgrass. Melinda has a really complex and fascinating professional biography. So rather than me trying to introduce her, I'm going to let her do it in the course of the hour. So let's just get started. And the first thing I want to start with is Melinda started off actually as a lawyer, as did David Drake. And so I know how David gave it up and why, but Melinda, how did you move from law to writing?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, Eric, thank you very much for
Sure.
including me in your convention. I've been having a ball. I'm meeting all kinds of new fun people on the panels. You know, I went to law school. I've always been torn between the arts. I was a singer. I studied opera in Vienna, Austria, and did theater and all those things. And then, I'm also sort of a hard-headed businesswoman on the other side. And it was always at war. I was always at war with myself. But my father, it was his death wish that I become a lawyer. He had this sort of charming old world attitude that lawyers were defenders of, the
Yeah.
right and good and so on. And so after spending time in Austria and realizing that I didn't have that 0.1% perfect voice, that was going to make it on the grand opera stage, and I've always had great mentors, all through my life. And one of them was my accompanist, who, when I would rehearse in Vienna, a wonderful pianist, married to a Wagnerian soprano who was like 6'2", and he was this little tiny guy. It was very cute. And he said to me one day, "You have a brain." And he said, "And your voice is too small for grand opera. We'll never get beyond operetta." And he said, "You have a brain, go back to the United States and finish your education." I went, okay. It's devastating. I'm, 19 years
Yeah,
old and I'm,
no, yeah, I know.
yeah.
I had a sister-in-law who was from my first wife, who was a very good singer. Linda and I used to go listen to her all the time, but and she was married to another, and they both had ambitions to be opera singers, and the problem was the same. Their voices just weren't big enough. I don't know how else to put it. I'm sure there's a technical word for it, but they both sang wonderfully. They sang at our wedding. I mean, wonderful singers. It's just they just
We didn't
couldn't cut it.
have that. And I'm a small person. I'm 5'2" and, weigh 102 pounds. And, I'm not.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Maria Callas wasn't exactly huge. I mean,
Big chest. Oh my God. I
oh
know
yeah, okay, but I know.
instrument, but I didn't make it. So I went home. I finished my degree in history and music, and went on and got accepted into law school. And it's interesting because I knew at the end of the first semester I'd made a terrible mistake. Um, I loved the study of law and I was very good at it, but I didn't like the atmosphere, the culture, I guess would be the best way to put it. But I was good at it. I kept passing, I kept doing well.
Hmm.
And I got through the 3 years, and I graduated just before my father's death. And so I felt obligated to go on and work. And so I did 3 years and hating every second of it because I passed the bar, I mean, you feel
Oh, you
obligated.
did?
Oh, I did. I passed the bar,
Okay.
like, okay, I guess I got to do this. So I did 3 years. I worked for the government for a while, and at a scientific laboratory overseeing purchasing, which was about as interesting as you think it would be. The scientists were great, the purchasing not so much. And then I went into a law firm, and my love was constitutional law, but you can't exactly, in retrospect, I should have gone and gotten to work for the ACLU. That probably would have satisfied me. But I ended up in this corporate law firm, and it
Yeah.
was awful. And I was the most unhappy human. And people laugh at me, but it was actually Star Wars that made me realize.
I'm gonna laugh at you. Okay, go ahead. I really got to hear that.
But my best friend at the time was a novelist, and
Uh-huh.
been encouraging me, Victor Milan, he had been encouraging me to write, because he said, you're very artistic, you're a singer and you're a dancer and you do all this theater and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, I bet you could write if you tried. And I started writing in secret, and Vic would read my stuff. And then he and I had this habit that we would go and see Star Wars movies together. This was our thing. And we went and saw, it was Empire Strikes Back. And we got to the scene where Yoda says to Luke, do or do not.
Yeah.
There is no lie. And for some reason, and we always went late at night. I don't know why we always went like a midnight show, but it was like this bolt had hit me. And I thought, I'm sitting here dithering day after day. I hate this. I hate this. I'm just going to do it. And I walked in the next day into the office, typed up my letter of resignation. I quit. And I packed my plan and my diplomas, and I walked out. I laid it on my boss's desk and said, I'm out of here. And, you know, I would leave the office, even while I was working, I'd leave the office, I would change in the bathroom into my dance clothes and go dance for 2 hours at my dance studio. I mean, I was so unhappy. And it was the greatest decision I ever made. I mean, I said, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to give it a year and see if I can make it as a writer. And it worked out. So, you know, that was how it started. And also Vic, I don't know if you knew Fred Saberhagen, but Fred was wonderful. He was so kind. He was so generous. And Vic had invited me to a barbecue. Well, there was first an autographing. It was Roger Zelazny and Fred Saberhagen and Susie McKee-Char, this amazing group of people. And, you know, they do their thing at the mall signing. And then Fred and Joan said, why don't you come to the house? We're having a barbecue and you're a friend of Vic's. These were the most fascinating people I had ever met, this gang of science fiction and fantasy writers. I mean, I would go from room to room, and Fred was reading this hilarious letter from this guy. Fred had written this book called The Holmes Dracula File, where Sherlock Holmes meets Dracula. Great book. And then he'd gotten this lunatic letter from a man in Romania who had talked, I'm so happy with the way you handled my ancestor, Vlad Tepes, blah, blah, blah. But as he read through it, it got crazier and crazier. And then you got to the end and you realize the guy was claiming that he was Dracula. And Fred's reading this. And Susie's in a room talking about the effects of linguistics on culture. And I thought, I'm with a bunch of lawyers and the only thing they ever talk about is their billable hours. I mean, you know, I have to. And we walked out and I clutched Vic and I said, I have to be part of this world. I have to. And that's when he said, I'll coach you if you want to start writing. So I did. And it was the greatest thing. But now I'm going to do my little PSA, my little, you know, or my little after school special thing, which is no education is wasted, ever. I mean, I could not have written the script that got me my job in Hollywood if I hadn't gone to law school and studied constitutional law. I have a book series about a young woman lawyer who works in a vampire law firm in Manhattan. Couldn't have written those books without the education. Worked on a show called Reasonable Doubts, which was a lawyer cop show. All of that has played into my writing and the stories I tell and the kind of things I like to explore. So I'm always saying when I tutor or teach classes, no education is wasted. Stay in school, study anything you want, but you're going to find it will pay off in dividends when you can go and, you know, after that artistic career that you want. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, I've over the years gotten, one of the things that drives me nuts is the obsession people have today, which I understand the economics of it, but it's this, well, I've got to go to college in order to get a training in this so that I'll have a, you know, get a job. And it's like, first of all, the average American goes through 3 different careers in their lifetime, and you have no idea where you're going to wind up when you're 40 or 50, number one. And you're better off just get an education. And the reason you go to college is not to get a goddamn job and work for a goddamn corporation. You get an education to get an education, period. That's the reason you do it. and study whatever it is that you would really like to study, because for one thing, you will do better at it than you will if you're studying something you're doing just because you think you need to get a paycheck. And secondly, you never know what's gonna, you really just don't know. And in my case, I was working for a PhD, and I was all the way to, ABD, all but dissertation. That's all I had left to do in history, which is generally considered about as useless a degree as you can get. Um,
Yep.
and well, you were others that were kind of, music history is, yeah. And especially because in my case, the one thing you can do with a PhD in history is teach history, but I decided after 3 years of grad school, I actually didn't want to. So by that point, as a political activist, I left, became a longshoreman. But years later, I wind up actually making quite a good living writing fiction, most of which is one way or another based on my historical training and background. So you just never know where it's going to wind up. And I think you're better off, God, whatever you do in life, don't ever put money first. You got to be practical about it. I have no romantic notions at all about the poverty. I've been poor. It sucks. But still, money's never the center of things. You never let it be, or you're just going to have a kind of miserable life. Let me ask you though, all right, so this is how you got started writing, but how did you wind up in Hollywood?
It's that mentor thing. It's that people paying it forward. I had Vic paying it forward that helped me become a novelist, which I still do. And it was George R.R. Martin, who got me into Hollywood. George and I had become good friends when he moved down to New Mexico. We were in a role-playing group together. We did all this stuff together. And George had gotten an opportunity to go to Hollywood, first to work on the new Twilight Zone, and then ultimately on the show Beauty and the Beast. And George called me one day and he said, hey, Snod, he calls me Snod, which is so attractive. He said, hey, Snod, I think you'd be really good at this screenwriting thing. You plot a lot, you're a real serious plot person, and they do that a bunch in Hollywood, and you're good at dialogue, and you have very powerful characters. If you want to write a spec script, I will show it to my agent. And my dad was a big influence in my life, but he had always taught me to always take risks, because you can always, if it doesn't work out, okay, you do something else, but always go for it. So when I was offered the opportunity, I decided to write a spec script. And George then carefully explained to me that you never sell your spec script. Your spec script is just a calling card. If a producer or a showrunner likes it, they'll have you come in, you can pitch ideas for the show or a show. So I had some ideas. I looked at various shows. I decided to go with Star Trek because I had grown up on Trek, and the new show, The Next Generation, had started. And so I started watching that show, and I became fascinated with the character Data, who was the robot, which is actually sort of a sad commentary on the TV show that the robot was the most interesting character. But, that's sort of how it all worked out. So I got this idea, and I realized that it was a very good idea. And I called George, and he gave me the single best piece of writing advice I've ever gotten. I said to him, I've got this idea. I think it's really, really hot. But if I write this for the spec script and it doesn't sell, I've wasted it. So maybe I should do something else and save this for the pitch. And George said to me, never hoard your silver bullet, meaning lead with the very best thing you've got and the thing you're most passionate about. Because if you write something that you think, it's like what you said about just working for money or just getting an education because you think it's the right thing to do and you don't have any passion for it. So I wrote this script called The Measure of a Man, which was inspired and created in a sense as a discussion of Plessy v. Ferguson, not Plessy, excuse me, Dred Scott. Was an infamous Supreme Court decision that where a runaway slave was ruled to be the property of the owner and not a person.
Right.
And I thought this would apply really, really well to the character of Data. He's a machine. Is he the property of Starfleet Command, or does he have rights in his own personhood? And so I wrote a courtroom drama, and George's agent sent the script in, and it was right after a writer's strike. They needed material, and I got this phone call, and they bought this. They wanted to meet me, so I go out to Hollywood, and who then became my boss, Morris Hurley. I started pitching ideas after he asked me a little bit about my background, and then he went shh, and he pointed at this big whiteboard behind his head, and it had the shooting schedule for the next 3 or 4 scripts, and my script was up there, and they bought Measure of a Man.
Okay.
So that launched my career, and then yeah, and then they hired me. I mean, they had me come in for a notes session, and after 3 hours of giving me notes and me coming up with solutions to the objections they had, I had to write a new teaser, for example, for the script. They hired me on the show, and that was my first Hollywood experience. And then I went on and worked on a number of subsequent shows. But it was, it was a good friend mentoring me. It was taking the chance and jumping on the opportunity, never miss that opportunity, and doing the best thing I could. So that's how it started.
Yeah, I've often told people that the reason that the logical reason to go to science fiction conventions is not to promote your work, because the math of that, if you figure it out, is you're always going to spend more or lose more by not writing than you can possibly make by showing up and promoting your work. The real reason to do it, well, partly just because I find it, for me, it's good for well, I can't do it now, but my job, where I am right here, is in a 7 by 13 foot room in my basement. This is where I've written over 50 novels, and I like it. It's very cozy. But basically, my job is to go down a basement and talk to myself all day, and I just find it's good for me to get out periodically and meet people. I didn't invent them. I don't know what they're going to say. So that's part of the reason why I go to conventions a lot. But the other reason to do it is you, over time, will build a professional network. And you do not know how it's going to pay off. There's no way to predict it. And if you're trying to do it for that reason, you're likely to shoot yourself in the foot. But over time, I have never known it not to pay off one way or another. For me, and obviously for you, and just about every successful writer I know. At one point or another, you can call it luck, but it's the kind of thing where people tend to create their own luck. And it's not impossible to be a successful writer being a recluse. Some writers have done it, but boy, it's going to be a lot harder. Let me ask you, what's the difference that you found between writing a script and writing, a book, a novel or a short story? Can you explain what the major differences are?
I think there are several. I mean, obviously we don't have the same amount of time in a screenplay that I would have in a novel. I mean, there are just economy of words and thought is really important. I mean, I kind of think I was born to be a screenwriter because I hate interior dialogue. My books have very little of it. It drives me nuts. I would rather put 2 people in a room and let them go at it than somebody ruminate. And I do not love description. It's one of my greatest flaws. The writers group is always saying, nice dialogue. Are they in a white room? So
yeah, the white room syndrome.
Yeah, I'm bad. I'm getting better about that, but I have to remind myself constantly, what are the 5 senses, blah, blah, blah. So there's that. I think the major thing is an emotional thing. I mean, you can learn to screenwrite and train yourself to cut down on the verbiage, weigh every line of dialogue. And you have to be able to plot. I mean, a lot of people who are pantsers, or what George calls a gardener, where you don't know where you're going.
Gardeners.
I mean, George is like, I have a seed, but I don't know if it's a kumquat or a stinkweed. I have to plant it and see. And I'm like, I would like to figure that out on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
I want to know. Hollywood, you do have to plot. So if you're not comfortable with that, this probably won't be a very rewarding experience for you. The major thing about it is that working in television and film is collaborative. It's very collaborative. And a lot of people are going to mess with your work, and you are going to get rewritten. Unless you are a famous writer director who gets to write your script and direct your script just the way you want it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know? And so you have to be open to the idea that other people will touch your work. And if you can't stand that, then stick with novels, because then it's your vision, and it's not, editors will make suggestions, but they're not going to come in and go, yeah, I'm going to fix this scene for you, you know.
Yeah.
And that's just going to happen in Hollywood. And you know, the trade-off is they give you large wheelbarrow loads full of money for the right to take your work and mess with it as they see fit. And so, you know, I think it's a cultural thing almost more than a skill set. But again, if you're a Jack Vance style writer, again, probably screenplays aren't going to be the best place for you, because that lush language and the beauty of the descriptions, nobody cares. Somebody else is going to come in and
Yeah,
do
no,
something.
no, sure. Yeah, the director's going to say, yeah, fine. All your description's fine. I'm going to decide where we film this, not you. So,
Right.
yeah, no, I do an enormous amount of collaborative writing. Most of what I write is collaborative. I've written a lot of novels solo, but part of the reason I do collaborative writing is this basement. I just like the interaction. I mean, I was used to a very social work environment, which I like, and I miss that. That's one thing. There's a lot of things I don't miss about manual labor. That's one of the things I do. And collaborative writing is partly that's why I do it. It's just kind of like the interaction with people. But one thing you have to be able to do is relax about somebody working with your own stuff. Otherwise, and there are authors I know, some friends of mine, who just the idea just drives them, gives them the willies, and that's fine. In that case, yeah, don't do collaborative writing, and you really probably wouldn't get along well in Hollywood at all. Because it just in the nature of things, it's gonna have to be collaborative, because there's no way a small number of people can make a movie. You just can't do it, or a TV series.
Thing too, I
And,
love it. I'm sorry.
and as far as the white room syndrome, when I started writing, it was one of the first things my publisher Jim Bain said to me. He said, "You tend to not have." He's the one who taught me the white room expression. He said, there's action and dialogue, but where is this happening? And I sort of grumbled. And he said, look, lots of writers have this problem. Poul Anderson had it, and what he did was he taught himself to do a special read of his manuscripts and make sure that on every page there was some audio, visual, or olfactory clue of some kind. He said, do that. And I started doing it. I would print up a copy of the manuscript and read it just from the point of view of, is there any descriptive passage on this page? And if there isn't, put one in. And I don't do that anymore, because over time I learned to do it. But yeah, it's one of the tricks of the trade. You just have to pick them up.
Writing in first person helped me, which I don't recommend for beginning writers. Everybody thinks that that's the easy thing to do. Don't. You need your toolbox before you start writing in first person, because it's much harder than you actually
It's
think.
much harder. Yeah, I know. I teach a seminar on how to start a novel, and I have 6 rules, and one of them is drop the stupid first person. Look, it can be done well, and if it's done well, then good. But usually it's not. It's a harder tense person to work with than third person. And the rule of thumb I give people is real simple. I said, look at 3 or 4 paragraphs of what you've written in first person. And if you can rewrite it in third person, doing nothing except changing the pronouns, then why the hell are you doing it in first person? You're not gaining anything from it. All you're doing is limiting the possible viewpoints you have. So anyway, I agree with you. And I want to raise something else, because this is something else I have rather strong opinions on, which is this issue of whether you plot or don't. Early in my career, Dave David Drake was my mentor more than anyone else. After I got my first novel published, Jim Bain hooked me up with David, and he and I collaborated with him on several novels, and that was sort of my apprenticeship, I guess. But early on, I said to David, I said, well, I like to write character-driven stories, and he started laughing. And I said, what's so funny? He said, Eric, every new author says that. I did too. He said, how many unfinished manuscripts do you have on your hard drive? And I said, maybe half a dozen. He said, yeah. He said, so did I. Then I started plotting, and now I don't have any. And I had to train myself to plot because it did not come easily or naturally to me to do it. But I made myself learn how to do it. And what I discovered is that plotting ahead of time will actually improve your characters because you have to think. What makes a character ultimately is what they do, not their various personality traits and tics and habits, which is, people get those two confused. But anyway, this is your interview, not mine. So please explain what you mean by you're an architect, because I think people should hear this.
I'm actually laying out the fourth book in my Carolingian series right now, and unfortunately, it's sitting in the living room on the hearth, and I should have brought it in as an example. But I think it came also from my law studies. You know, how do you write a brief? How do you communicate what it is you want to say to the court? And so I sort of carried that into writing. And then once I went to Hollywood, this is one of the things, being in a writer's room, because we are alone so much. This is such a solitary profession when you're writing novels. I mean, yes, we have all the cheering section in our head talking to us all day long, but we are alone. But being in a writer's room in Hollywood with a good writing staff is the most fun I've ever had. We had a great writer's room on Wild Cards. Love those people. But what you do in a writer's room is we call it breaking a story, and are, outlining it or, creating the architecture of it. But I brought it back because it works really well for novels too. And so what I do is I work on a cork board rather than a whiteboard, because erasing when you want to move a scene is always a pain. So if you can just move the card, it's much easier. So the first thing I do, I'm going to talk about novels, and if people want to get in touch with me later, I'll talk to you about screenplays. But I lay out a teaser and 3 acts, unless it's a huge novel. I mean, if you're doing a doorstop fantasy, maybe you'll do a teaser and 5 acts, but normally it's 3. And then the first thing I do is I say, what is the end of this book? What is the climax of this book? Mm-hmm. If I don't know that, I don't have a book.
So first rule I tell people, if you don't know how the story ends, at least in broad outlines, how are you going to end the conflict that's at the center of the story, or how are you going to resolve whatever the issue is? If you don't know that, don't start writing, because all that's going to happen is, and you do, I got this great idea. That's why I've got unfinished novels on my hard drives, because it was a great idea, and I start writing and realize I have no idea how I'm going to end this damn thing. And if you can't end it, you don't have a story.
Yeah, so
anyway, yeah.
At the end of Act 3, I put down how it ends. Then I normally go and put the teaser in. I sort of go back to Robert Heinlein's, you've got a page to convince somebody to buy this book instead of the 6-pack of beer. So then I figure out, all right, if I know what the end is, what's the hook? What's the thing in that opening that is going to make people want to read this book? And then I figure out the end of Act 2 and the end of Act 1. What is going to happen at, Act 1 is, for me, introducing the characters, introducing the problem, setting up the world so that people, are comfortable in it. And then the problem. Usually at the end of Act 2, everything's gone to hell, so, oh my God, you think you've got a wonderful plan, it all goes bad, blah, blah. I mean, these are broad strokes, but if I know those endings of those 3 acts, it is so much easier to plot backwards, to figure out what are the scenes I need to get me to those big climactic moments. In Hollywood, we literally have every scene on the board for all the teaser and 5 acts. We can't do that with a novel, or I'd have 5 boards. But I put in what I call the tentpole scenes, which are sort of what are the big moments, what are the big kaboom moments that are going to be in this book, and then the rest I can fill in as I'm working. But what that does is I get up in the morning, I look at my outline, and I know exactly what my job that day is. You know, I'm not sitting there going, oh gosh, I don't know, what are they going to do next? You know?
Yeah, I know.
And if you're on deadline, if you're a writer who's meeting contractual deadlines, I really think it's very hard to be a gardener or a pantser. It's very hard to keep that schedule. And I think people who do outline, who do plan, have a much better chance of meeting their obligations.
I agree with you, and I do know this, that like I said, I had to beat myself into learning how to doing outlines because I did not like doing it. David Drake likes to do it. I mean, to me, it's, of course, he translates Ovid from Latin, and you know, everybody has odd ways of relaxing, including me. But I trained myself to do it. And what I discovered is, yeah, you'll spend quite a bit of time developing an outline, but you will save all that time when you write, because I have exactly the same experience you do. And I sit down in the morning, I don't have to sit there and say, oh, geez, what am I just pull up the outline. It's okay, I know where I am. And then you just start writing.
I'm going to throw another tip to
Go
this.
ahead.
One of the other things Hollywood taught me, which is so useful, assign a different colored pen to your major characters. Be a color-coded thing. So your hero's in blue and your antagonist is in red and the love interest is in green or whatever. Because what that does is, as you're plotting, you can discover if a character's dropping out. And it's a visual image of, oh, wait a minute, I haven't done anything with this character and I'm in Act 3 and they just sort of fell out of the story, which either tells you you need to put them in or you don't need them.
Right.
Sometimes you find out that a character you really thought was important, not so much. And you can get rid of that character, maybe slot in another character who keeps bumping up against you going, hey, me, how about me? I'd like to, you know. And, you know, that happened on Trek one day. We looked up and we had a color for Troy, Marina Sirtis's character, and she was just gone after Act 2. And we had 5 acts on that show, God. And we were like, oh God, we've lost Marina. And so we had to go back and figure out, but it was because suddenly the blue ink was gone. And it's such a useful visual tool that I really recommend it as a sort of another aid to your plotting.
You know, it's fascinating because I use exactly the same tool. I don't do it the way you do it. I don't use different color pens. What I do is once I've figured out the plot, in which I'll do by writing, but eventually I will do a chapter breakdown on an Excel file, and I'll put down which characters are in the chapter, when it happens, where it happens, and a 1-line description, just 1 line. And then what I do is I use the color coding. You know, you can color code a whole row, and I go down and do exactly what you do, is I have different colors for different characters, and I do it for exactly the same reason. You know, how often are these characters showing up? Are the major characters showing up more often? And I do it for exactly the same reason you're talking about. It's just, okay, am I letting a character drop that I shouldn't, or do I have a character who's appearing too often? Why are they even in it? Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Yeah, I do exactly the same thing. I don't use your specific technique, but it is a very good idea to figure out a way to do that, because otherwise your story is going to be, it's hard to explain it, but you know what I'm talking about. Readers they won't be able to intellectually explain it, but they will sense that the story is just kind of
meandering.
It's wandering around. It's oatmeal. It's, you know, it's just, yeah.
And I really want people to know how that story ends. I mean, I know some people will argue that the journey is all that matters. The journey is the thing, you know. And I think if you don't stick the landing, if you don't give people a satisfying ending, they're always going to walk away disappointed. And that I think endings are hugely important. I mean, I just and honestly, for me as a reader, more important than the journey. If I've gone through this whole thing and they let me down, I'm going to be so angry, you know, and so I feel cheated. I mean, and I'm going to mention an example. I play video games, and there was this brilliant series of video games called Mass Effect, and they blew the ending of the 3rd game. I mean, blew it. And I had invested 150 hours of game in this game. It was my reward in the evenings. It was like, okay, I've done my writing, I've worked the horses, now I can play Mass Effect. And I got to the end, and in the final 15 minutes, they just wrecked the entire experience. And I often go back and replay games I love. I have not been able to bring myself to replay that game.
Yeah,
Even
I
though
know,
it's
yeah.
brilliant until the end. And it was like, okay, useful lesson, don't blow your ending.
It is. Every story, and it's just as true of so-called popular fiction as it is of Dostoevsky, or James Joyce. Every story has a point to it. If it doesn't have a point to it, it's not a story. And the way I illustrate that when I teach classes, I say, here, do a mental experiment. Write down, don't actually do it in your own head, everything that happened to you yesterday. Is that a story? It's a sequence of events, there's a logic to it, but is it a story? And the answer is no, there's no point to it. It was just a day. And it's the same way with a story. If it doesn't end somewhere that makes a point, then you don't actually have a story in the first place. And you damn well better know. You don't necessarily have to figure out all the details, and the details may change. My novel 1632 actually ends 6 months earlier than it was supposed to. I mean, in the storyline, but the conflict was resolved.
Mhm.
And once I got to that point, I realized, well, okay, this is the end of the book. But I knew how that conflict was going to get resolved before I even started it. And I'm sure you've had exactly the same experience. The details may change when you write it. Any story is going to change in the course of writing, but you have to know where you're going and where you're going to end up, at least in broad outlines, or you just don't even have a story to begin with.
Well,
Anyhow,
it's that
go ahead.
plot versus theme thing too. I mean, I talk a lot about the importance of, plotting is easy. That's the stuff that happens. I often use a rougher word, but it's the stuff that's going to happen. Busyness, and that's easy. But if you don't know the theme, if you don't know what is this about and why does it matter, plot is the stuff that happens. Theme is why it matters.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know that theme, if you always have that sort of as the underpinnings of your plot and your story, you're going to give readers a satisfying experience. It's what does it say about the human condition? I mean, what does this story illuminate about what being human means? Being in love. I mean, it's the human heart in conflict with itself. Which one was it? Dashiell Hammett, I think, who said that. And
I think it was, yeah.
yeah, and I love that phrase. It's so evocative of what we always aspire to do with our writing, which is, take people on a journey that feeds their spirit, I guess, is another way to say it. And so, I love it. I'm so glad I fell into this profession. Is in such a confused, different way, but I did. And it's been so rewarding, whether it's writing books or writing for Hollywood.
What are you working on now?
I'm actually, well, I'm writing a short story for Wild Cards, which is a series I co-edit and write for with George. And I'm also, working on outlining this fourth book in this urban, it's kind of a occult thriller thing that I'm writing. I've got 3 books that are done and will be coming out. We're working on getting them back available. And I'm noodling around. I have a big space opera that I do as well. And the first book is up and the other books are coming up, going to be out soon. It is space opera, but with a real look at society and economics, and how societies structure themselves, and about otherness and second-class citizenship. Because that the con law thing and my interest in those issues. There are some space battles. I do have all of that, but but I'm more interested in what a society in crisis. And God knows we're living through one right now, what that looks like. And I'm trying to decide if I'm going to fill in some of the openings in the series, or if I'm going to pick up the next generation. Because, when you put in the energy and you create this huge universe, you sort of hate to go, okay, well, I've done 5 books, I'm done with that now. It's like,
No,
yeah,
I know.
I got to use.
Uh,
I've got that, and my White Fang Law series, which is about my young woman lawyer in a vampire law firm. I need to write a 4th book. I've left her in a very precarious place at the end of book 3. I mean, I think it's a satisfying ending, but there is clearly another story. I want to talk about white privilege and male privilege in this 4th book. So I think it's going to be it's going to be fun. But I have to get the 4th Carolingian book done first, and so it's
yeah.
and I have a I have a TV pilot that I wrote based on these Carolingian books actually, and we were supposed to film it in June, but we've had a pandemic, so I haven't started filming my pilot yet. But we're working on it. I just wrote voiceover dialogue for our sizzle reel, which a sizzle reel is sort of a sales tool where you very quickly in 4 or 5 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, maybe present the themes of the show, what it's going to be, a sense of the characters, and what it's about. It's just another. It's like a deck, or which is often sometimes called a lookbook. So this thing now has a Bible, a pilot, a deck, and we're working on the sizzle reel. So hopefully we'll.
What do you call it? A sizzle reel?
A sizzle reel. One of the things you'll hear in Hollywood is don't sell the steak, sell the sizzle. You can introduce them to the steak later. First, you want them to get in on the sizzle. So yeah, it's a sizzle.
There are, yeah, I over the past some years now, I've gotten somewhat to know that industry because there's been some interest in doing stuff on the 1632 series. But it's in many ways it's a very different industry from publishing. From print publishing, and it tends to be one that print writers tend to sneer at, and it's certainly Hollywood TV and film has their quirks, God knows. But one thing I say to people is, okay, here's $100 million, make a movie, and they'll stare at me, and I say, yeah, it's a lot harder than it looks, isn't it? So you will learn a lot from it. And I like that expression. I've heard it, you sell the sizzle, not the steak. Where do you, what are your plans now in terms of where you're going to, right now, sounds like you're sort of splitting your career, I guess I could call it that, between your own writing and what you're doing in films and TV. Is that more or less correct of where you are now?
That's pretty much correct. I mean, at the moment, film is just starting to come back, and
yeah.
it's so at the moment I'm focusing a lot more on the books right now, because I can't do much. And I'm also, I gotta say, I was in LA for a long time. I'd come home to New Mexico once a month, but I was out there, and now I feel I'm home. My horses are here. I'm here. I feel grounded. It's a beautiful place. It's a magical place in many ways, and I'm glad to be home. And we do have a lot of film that goes on here once we can film safely. I mean, the biggest problem with this pandemic is that if it was going to cost $4 million to shoot a pilot, now it's going to cost $8 million. It's doubling the cost of shooting because of all of the safety precautions, right? So, which are in place, but it makes it very tough. So at the moment, I'm just chugging away on the books and working with my team on getting this project, up. Now, if this thing should go, if a pilot is, well received, or we pitch it early and sell it to a streamer or a network, and it goes to series, then I'll be a showrunner and I won't be able to work on the books that much. Show running is, George and I have often wondered if you have to be crazy in advance to become a showrunner, or if being a showrunner makes you crazy.
I would not want to do it. It's a, yeah, no, I can just imagine what that's like.
Well, my plan is to get a really good co-exec producer who can, deal with some of the data and let me focus on the writer's room and the writing, which is where and not that I don't want to be, I want to spend time in editing and, casting, but some of it, if you can pass it off to a great line producer or to a good co-exec, but no, that would definitely change my focus if this goes to series or if I get hired on another show. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, both of them are very rewarding in very different ways. So
Yeah, no, I've been at a distance from film. See, I've seen it at a distance. I've never worked in it, and well, I have no idea if I ever will. But let me ask you just a completely unrelated question. How long have you been riding horses?
Since I was 3 years old.
Oh, really? It goes back that far? Yeah.
Taos, New Mexico. We had gone up to Taos, my family, and they had.
Oh, is that where you grew up? In
grew up
Taos?
in New Mexico. I grew up in New Albuquerque and Santa Fe.
Oh, okay. All right.
I love Taos, but
Yeah, I've been through it once. Yeah.
oh, it's beautiful. And
Yeah,
yeah, they're going to scatter my ashes there because that's how much I love it. I rode my first horse, but they had a rental stable, and I begged and begged and got to ride. I was, late, almost 4. And then my dad got me a horse, and I rode Western for a while. And then I got sent to this summer camp where our riding instructor was from Britain, and we rode English and we jumped. So then I came home and I said, I want to jump. I wanted to have a jumper. And so I got into that, did it for years, and then woke up one day and went, you rarely hear about dressage riders getting killed, because jumping is exhilarating, shall we say. And so I switched over to
dangerous as hell, but
yeah,
anyway.
I mean, I've left kneecaps on uprights, and I've jumped when the horse didn't, and did all that. So then I got into dressage, and I've been doing that ever since. And I own 2 horses right now. They're both Lusitanos. Boy, don't get me started, Eric. I love my horses.
No, I told you already. I'm going to be picking your brains because that's it. Over the years, I've learned there are 3 subjects you damn well better make sure you get every single detail right. You never hear the end of it: guns, horses, and sailing. And I had a friend who was my horsewoman and was my expert, but unfortunately, Karen passed away a few years back. I rode horses as a teenager quite a bit, and I was even fairly good at it. But then I, moved back to LA, and unless you're quite wealthy, you're not going to ride a horse. And there are places in LA zoned for horses, but you have to have a pretty good income in order to live there.
There's a reason I lived way out west, because when I had my place in LA, because I could keep my horses at, and not have it be at the equestrian center.
Where did you live?
I lived in Westlake Village. I had a town.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Town houses under contract. I'm selling out between the fires and the pandemic and the earthquakes. I'm like, I'm going to come back to Santa Fe. And yeah, my horses are here. They're Portuguese horses. They're called Lusitanos. They're bred for warfare and bullfighting, and but they're great dressage horses. And I have a stallion named Vinto de Broga, and I have a gelding who's a good deal younger, who's a buckskin, named Donador, who we call Noodles because it just kind of fits him. And in fact, I'm going to work with my coach at 12:45 today. I ride generally 5 to 6 days a week. And that's the other thing. I think writers make a mistake in that they don't have physical activity in their lives. And I think that's a terrible mistake. Yeah, go riding, go to the gym, take a hike, do anything. Don't just live in your, office cave with the box. It's really important.
I used to walk a lot. And then I got cancer, and it kind of blew my schedule. And I really need to get back to it. Lucille and I talk about, and we sort of try to do it, but we're not getting. We got to work on it because, yeah, I agree with you. And also, the single most important thing I think for anybody's health is just be active. You don't even have to think of it as exercise, because that's sort of, oh God, I gotta go down to the gym, and oh my God, I'm already tired thinking about it. Just get off your butt and walk around the block a few times. I mean, just don't be a couch potato. That's the main thing. That's what will kill you faster than anything.
You know, if I go take a walk or I go ride the horses, that scene will often, it'll often resolve itself. You know, when I get back, I'll go, oh, right, I know how to fix that now.
Yeah.
Just that.
Kevin Anderson, of course, Kevin's crazy. Kevin likes to hike through the Rockies and dictate his novels. That's a little extreme for me, but he's done it for years, and you know, what can you say? He's had an extremely successful career.
While I walk,
Music,
you know.
Melinda, I think we're probably getting very close to being out of time. Is there any last thing you'd like to talk about, or I mean, one thing, it sounds like you've gotten a lot from Hollywood. It sounds like, I mean, you've learned a lot in the process of working in films and TV. Is there anything in particular you think it's done in terms of improving your prose, or I mean, what is there benefits you've gotten that spill over outside of Hollywood, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, absolutely. Hollywood made me a better prose writer. Every scene, I think it hones the story you're telling. There are no wasted, I try to never have a wasted scene now because of Hollywood, and to keep that drive and that energy that hopefully, I mean, I even take some of the way we cut in Hollywood from scene to scene, I actually use it in my prose now as well. So I think it's been hugely helpful for me. I think it made me, my dialogue was always good, but I think this sense of pulsing energy that I can bring to a book now that I'm better at because of the time I spent in Hollywood. And I guess, you know, my conclusion would be, this is a wonderful profession with people who will help you. People who will give you advice and coach you and counsel you. There's enormous generosity in our field. And, you know, never be afraid to reach out. I had a woman reach out to me on Facebook just a few days ago, and, you know, about how to get an agent and, you know, what to do with this memoir that had been sent to her and by her great uncle. And everybody helped me, and we pay it forward. So, you know, it's a wonderful profession. Don't be afraid of it. And the beauty of writing is that nobody has to give you permission. You know, you don't have to go pass the bar exam or get a.
No, there's no, yeah, it's, you can just do it. Yeah, no, you're right about that. And I also agree with you. It's I don't know if collegial is the right word, but it is by and large a very friendly profession. And that includes, you know, even I am now myself a publisher, so I have been actually drawn to the dark side. But you know, even I get along well with most publishers. You know, I mean, it's generally nobody's trying to hurt you. You know, it's
the pie gets bigger. The pie doesn't get smaller. You know.
Yeah, I do teach a seminar or a class at the writers, Superstars Writer Seminars, and I give what we call a gloom and doom talk, which is the economics of publishing. And what I try to explain to people is, look, there's a reason why everybody ignores you when you first come in, why it takes forever to get your manuscript read, why you're likely to be rejected. There are actually good economic reasons for it. They're honestly not persecuting you, even though that's what it will feel like at first, is, you know, why do they hate me, you know? And I think it helps people when they can see, okay, now I understand the logic of it, because there is certain economic imperatives to any kind of entertainment that make it rough if you're a newbie. They really can make it very rough, but the actual culture, and you know, and when you deal with people, it's very helpful and friendly. There are some not nice people in the business, but that's true of any business. By and large, I've found that If one thing, writers aren't competing with each other. I mean, they're really not. People don't go into a bookstore and choose between two different writers based on who's going to win. I mean, that's just not how it works. And I write alternate history a lot, and so I suppose I could say Steve Sterling and Harry Turtledove are my big competitors, but the fact is all three of us help each other because it boosts the whole subgenre and makes it more interesting to more people.
Right.
Anyhow, so what do you have any book or anything coming out very soon that you would like to pitch or plug to people?
Forgive me, I actually don't have copies of the book yet in my hands, but there are two books available right now up on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, the Nook, and everywhere else. One is called This Case is Going to Kill Me, and it's my White Fang Law, and a book called The High Ground, which is the first book in my Imperial saga, my space opera. Both of those are available right now, and there will soon be more to follow. And just come follow me on Facebook and Twitter. And I don't write on my blog as much as I should, but you can find me there as well. And so just come and check things out, and always feel free to get in touch with me. I'm trying to pay it forward. So those are the two major books, and hopefully I will soon have copies in hand. In fact, I have to get on them and get copies of right now.
What's the best way where are you most I don't know if active is the right word, but where do you show up most online? Is it
Facebook and Twitter. I'm terrible at Instagram because I don't take a lot of pictures. I'm a word person. So, but Twitter and Facebook are where the best place to reach out to me. And I do have a website. It has pictures of the covers. It has information, and I have a blog, which I have to write in right now about Justice Ginsburg. The lawyer in me has to talk about that. And the importance of voting. Go register. Vote.
All right.
Vote.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Melinda. And it has been nice talking to you.